Good evening and welcome to the Sound Off Show. My name is Linda Kirker. I host this program and thank you so much for joining us tonight. I have a brand new guest who's not been on the show before, and before I introduce him, however, I want to remind you that tomorrow, September 11th, is not Constitution Day, Patriot Day, and that's why I have the flag here, because I'm a patriot, and I hope you are too. And I also have the American Patriots Handbook with all the important documents, the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights, all the amendments to the Constitution and so forth, the articles. And if you don't have a copy of the Constitution, the handbook, let me know and I'll get you one. Okay, because our children need to learn about the foundation of our country. They're going to be the future. So before I introduce my guest, one more thing. I have a few quotes that I came across that a friend of mine had sent to me. And I love things like this. I hope that you will enjoy them as much as I do. Here's number one. A bad attitude is like a flat tire. You can't go anywhere until you change it. Common sense. And here's another. Helping one person might not change the whole world, but it could change the world for one person. Think about it. We can have such an effect on other people. Speak to your children as if they are the wisest, kindest, most beautiful, and magical humans on earth. For what they believe is what they'll become. Be careful what you teach them and what you demonstrate for them. Never accept anything less than you deserve. Remember, you teach people how to treat you by what you allow them to do. And I have a definition of integrity here that I think is wonderful. Integrity is doing the right thing when no one is looking. And just two more, and then we'll get to my guest. This is from Sheryl Sandberg. I want every little girl who's told that she's bossy to be told instead that she has leadership skills. And the last one is a quote. The secret of your future is hidden in your daily routine. Think about that. I love these. So thanks for putting up with me on that. Now I'm going to introduce my guest, someone I've known for a long time, but also had not seen for many, many, many years. His name is Mike Audet. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Thank you.
Glad to have you. Yes, glad to have you here. I'm excited because I just love what you're doing. And I want to ask you to tell the viewers what it is that you do. You can start and just tell us. Go for it.
Sure.
Speak up.
So I live in Underhill, and I have a clinic called Back to Basics Reading Clinic. And I teach basic skills, including reading, writing, math, colonial history, European history, science, and Latin and Greek root words embedded in our language.
That's amazing. You have to be one smart fella. So when you're teaching the basic reading, the clinic, you incorporate that for both children and adults as needed as they come to you, correct?
That's correct. I've taught children from more than one at 5 years old, including my youngest son, and I've worked with people who are all the way up to 80 years old.
80?
80.
Woo! I can deal with that one. You focus on phonics in
Absolutely.
teaching reading, and I would like for you, if you would, Mike, to share with the viewers what phonics is. Some of us who are older, like myself, and even you at some point, were taught reading using phonics, which I'm a big proponent of, and you found great success in teaching with that. So,
absolutely.
So tell us what phonics is.
Okay. We have a sound symbol based language. So phonics comes from phone means sound, and we do not basically have a sight-based reading system. We have a sound symbol relationship. So if you think of the letters of the alphabet as a code, and that 26-letter code would have sounds or more than one sound attached to each letter. There's 26 letters and 44 sounds. And so it's a sound-based reading system. And that was used in our country up until 1930.
Phonics?
Yes.
Well, wait a minute. I was taught phonics after 1930. So, but what do you mean they didn't use it after 1930?
Well, is not 100% of anything. I mean, there were Catholic schools, there were Protestant schools, there were private schools, and there were probably, after that, there might have been 10% of schools in the United States that still taught phonics.
Okay.
But the changing point, up until then, they taught reading phonetically.
I'm so glad that I learned to read through phonics, sound, because I can look at a word I've never seen before and sound it out and, and be correct with it because I learned that method of reading. So how did you get started in this business that you started?
Sure, it's a great question. I got started over 20 years ago when I discovered I was very busy then. I was going to graduate school. I was also teaching college at the same time, and I was doing a lot of studying, writing my thesis and so on. I wasn't paying attention, and the heartbreaking thing is my daughter had just finished third grade, and she'd been to summer school, I believe, 3 summers, and this was the 3rd summer. So she was been to school 4 years, K, 1, 2, 3. And she couldn't read or spell. And it was very, very heartbreaking for me because I hadn't been paying attention. I felt bad about that. I felt bad about her.
Of course.
Because it affects a child's self-esteem very, very much, for sure.
Yeah, you spoke to me a little bit about that and on the phone. And if a child can't keep up with their peers, their fellow students in the classroom, what does that do to them?
Well, they integrate it as they're doing something wrong with them. A child at that age, at age 8, we don't have perspective until we've had life experience.
Exactly.
Right? We come into the world, and so she saw that as something, her failure. She didn't see it as a systemic issue or anything like that. She
felt she didn't measure up, or she wasn't capable, or something along those lines. And that's an awful thing for a child to experience. I mean, we all have things that we're better at than other people, and other people are better at some things than we are. But this is so foundational, so fundamental.
It is.
To the ability to learn. If you can't read, how can you learn?
It's very, very difficult, for sure.
So you were giving the gift of learning to read to so many people. And I give you a lot of credit for that because it's going to change their lives.
That's for sure.
Let me see here.
Yeah, a few years later, I taught a gentleman who was 39 years old, and when he called me, he told me when he graduated from school, he couldn't read his diploma, and when they handed it to him, he looked at it and he said he tried to give it back to them, but he couldn't read his diploma, and he said he'd been in all these classes, after school classes and stuff.
Help.
Remedial reading and so on. He still couldn't read, and he had a lot. His wife stayed home. He worked, and if he lost his job, it would be terrible. And I told him if he came to me every week for an hour, and he's willing to work with me, that I believed I could have him reading a book within a year. And he had a lot of anxiety about it, too. I mean, if you've been all that time without reading. And so we went to work diligently, and he did. He came in every week. And then toward the end of the year, I took a book off my bookshelf called Old Yeller. It was a beautiful book about a dog written in the 1880s in Texas. And each week he'd read me a chapter. And when he got done the book, I had tears in my eyes, he had tears in his eyes, and then he hugged me and he said, "I'll always be with you." It changed his life.
Oh, goodness. I could cry too. What a gift. I just, it can change lives.
Can.
That must give your heart a real warm feeling. I printed out some of the testimonials that I read from your site, and I'd like to share a few with the viewers. Let me see here.
You can tell somebody the name of my site. It's Back to Basics Reading Clinic.
Yes.
.com.
Folks, if you would like to access Mike's website, it's backtobasicsreadingclinic.com. And there you will see quite a bit that Mike has provided, but also testimonials from former students. And I was so touched by these. Let me see. Here's one, family from, where are they? Underhill. Our daughter was in 7th grade and barely reading on a 3rd grade level. Her lack of self-esteem and confidence were obvious, but we were at a loss as to what to do. The teacher called her condition dyslexia. Finally, at the end of my rope, I called Mike at Back to Basics Reading Clinic. We have been working with Mike for almost 2 years now. Through phonics and Mike's gentle persistence, today B, which is the initial for the student, can read well enough to be in the regular classroom with her peers and is achieving A's and B's in her classes. But more importantly, she is confident in herself and chooses to read for leisure. She now looks forward to going to college and her future. I owe my daughter's future to Mike Audet and Back to Basics. Thanks, Mike. That warms the cockles of my heart. And let me see. Here's another one from Essex, Vermont. We are so grateful for Mike and Back to Basics. We tell everyone about his program. And another one. Thanks to Mike, I am getting A's and B's in school. I also feel confident at school and I have fun. Mike is kind, fun, and funny. Both my sister and I have fun when we visit Mike every week. Thanks a lot, Mike. This is a 10-year-old. And there are more. Maybe I can share later. But what is it that prompted you to do this in the beginning?
Well, like I said, I wasn't paying attention, and it was very, very hard for me to see.
Your daughter?
My daughter, yeah. And I thought, well, I've got to do something about this. So I already had my graduate degree, and I went back to college for the third time to earn my certification as a certified master tutor. And that took some time. And so during that time, I went out of my way to go to presentations I had to do with authors. One of the ones, I went to a number of authors to listen to them, and I think probably the biggest impact came a teacher by the name of John Taylor Gatto, and he was New York City Teacher of the Year 3 times, and ultimately he became New York State Teacher of the Year. And so I met him in Buffalo, New York, and that's where he got his award for State Teacher of the Year. And then I read one of his books. It's called The Underground History of American Education. And it took me all winter to read it. It was very large. I don't know, 600-700 pages. And it changed my view of what's going on in education. And John himself had taught for, I think, something like 34 years in New York City. And when he received his award, what he did was he told them what, from his view, what was really going on in the schools, and why children have difficulty and so on, why they're so angry sometimes, generally.
Frustrated.
Frustrated, yeah. And at that point, he got his award, and when he stepped down off the podium, he didn't have a job to go back to. And you can read about this at YouTube, John Taylor Gatto, New York State Teacher of the Year, and you can read about it, and you can hear what he had to say.
When you say he didn't have a job to go to, what are you inferring there?
My understanding was, this is my understanding was, after he said what was going on, they didn't want him back.
In the school system?
That's my understanding of it.
Well, you know, there are things that work, and there are things that don't work. And education basics are so critical. What we learn in those first years in school, the fundamentals for the future learning and growth occur in those early years, And so we need to make sure that our children are getting those basics well ingrained in them, because reading is so critical. Even, you know, how can you write well? Can you write well if you can't read well?
Well, in my mind, I call it the right way to read, and that is, the students that have not been taught to write, and I've taught many students to write. And when I say the right way to learn to read and spell is W-R-A-T-E. And so in our lessons, I have them write every word and have them say the word, and then each letter that they're writing down to say the letter, and when they're done, to say the word again. And that way they're having a conversation with their brain to reinforce what they're doing. And by that process, I found out that children have really high retention.
High retention.
Mm-hmm. That's one of the things I do. I do lots of brain exercises.
Well, can you
Sure.
want to give us another one?
Well, that is one of them. I would say when I teach phonics, I do direct, systematic, explicit, sequential phonics.
Oh boy.
That sounds like a big mouthful, I know. If you
Sorry,
do
your
it that
chair's
way,
slipping back on
yeah.
you.
If you do it that way, then the child or the adult will understand what you're talking about. So, for example, 62.5% of syllables in the English language contain a short vowel sound. 37.5% contain a long vowel sound. So if you look at it logically, it would stand to reason that you're going to teach a child the short vowel sounds first.
Like
It would,
like, or what? A versus
ah.
Okay.
So we go over that, and I explain to them that a
Don't
version.
roll away from me.
Okay, I tell them that virtually all single so like a word like cat, hat, sat. All words have a single vowel in them. Most of them, almost all of them are short, not all of them. I mean, I can think of a few words in English, maybe 15 words, that don't have a short vowel, like go.
Yeah,
So,
the sound.
the sound,
Oh,
yeah.
instead of hot, pot, and whatever. Trot.
So the short vowel sounds are it, Those are short vowel sounds. So if you say a word like cat or sat or hat or fat or mat, you're using a short vowel sound. If you're going to, and then it's a different rule you'd follow for long vowel sounds. If you take a word like hat and you add on a silent E,
Yeah.
it's going to, that silent E, the diacritical mark is a slash through it, and that's going to make the first vowel long. So the hat becomes hate.
Oh, if you have the two vowels
Yeah.
and one at the end, the first one is the longer.
Right. Generally, it's not the strongest rule in the world, but to remember it, you'd say if two vowels go walking hand in hand, the first one would say its name, and the second one would be silent. But that's not a 100% rule. But that is a guide. It gives you a place to start.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's not simple, but I'm glad you know it.
Well, if you work at it systematically and sequentially, it all falls in line. I think of education. All education is an additive thing. Everything
The basics, you build on the basics.
what goes before. And so I'm always going 2 steps forward, 1 step back. The 1 step back is a review. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And we don't go on with our lessons until they can do that. A child or an adult can do that. Because then I'd be stressing them.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So while you're working with the students, but they're in school, how does that work? You work with them like after school or on a weekend or something, and then they're trying to apply this in the classroom, or how does that work?
Okay. So I'm flexible about hours. I work, if need be, on Saturdays and Sundays, and often do it after school. And so I don't see children alone. Parents can't drop them off, come back in an hour. I want the parent to be there with the child. So I become a model for teaching them so they can carry that on at home.
Good.
And support the child.
Good. I think that's... Now, do you ever get any feedback from teachers in the classroom who perhaps have learned that Johnny or Susie has been getting assistance from you in learning to read, and the teacher sees big improvements? Do you ever get any feedback from anyone in the school system?
Once in a great while I do, and a teacher will call me up and say, notice some big differences, and what are you doing? And I'll tell them I teach them phonics. I don't go into details. I say, yeah, teach them phonics.
Why do you think that the education system has gotten away from phonics?
What I will say is that if you read the book, The Underground History of American Education, I'm not giving you a short answer. Well, I'm giving you a short answer. I've been reading for years, and I would say people need to do their homework, read the book, The Underground History of American Education, or read the book by Dr. Rudolph Flesch, the 1955 book called Why Johnny Can't Read. And he will take you through step by step by step, in his case, teaching his grandson to read. I'm sorry, what?
Why Johnny Can't Read?
Why Johnny Can't Read, written by Rudolph Flesch, F-L-E-S-C-H.
Okay.
Written in 1955. And then actually a direct answer to the question you asked me is that before he passed away in 1980, he wrote another book, Why Johnny Still Can't Read. Oh. And that answers that question.
Whoa.
And both books are very excellent. They are excellent.
Who would you recommend read those? Parents or teachers or?
Oh, anybody that wants to understand why so many children in this country have problems reading.
Well,
it's a systemic issue. It's not just one place. It's all over the country.
Well, and it has to be because of the methods that we have gone to for teaching reading. I mean, similar thing with mathematics. When my grandsons were, maybe 10 and 12, something along that line, we were talking about something. We were trying to figure out a math problem. And so I said, wait a minute. And I got my pen and paper, and I just took me like a few seconds, and I had the answer. And they said, how did you do that? I said, well, that's how I learned to figure it out. You know, they're not doing the times tables anymore. 8 times 8, 8 times 8, 64. 9 times 9, 81. You know, we memorized. And I don't think they're memorizing today. I could be wrong, but I think that's accurate. And if someone who is viewing this show knows differently or would like to make a comment, you can see the phone number is on the screen. We'd welcome your comment or your question. I'm not going to think of all the questions, so feel free to throw some at us.
I don't pretend to have all the answers, or even, I can tell you what I've experienced with kids coming in, and I've been doing this over 20 years, and I've yet to have a child or adult come in, and when I ask the child what the short vowel sounds are, they look at me and they go,
what?
Yeah. And I've yet to have it happen yet. There's somebody to come in and tell me the short vowel sounds. And that is very fundamental to beginning to learn our language phonetically.
Absolutely. So I mean, learning to spell and read is so critical to, it's just so basic to being able to write a coherent letter. You know, you're older and you're writing a letter because you're interested in employment and you can't express yourself appropriately. That's not helpful. And if you have to write a paper in college or even in high school, we had to write papers. How do you do that?
In my clinic, I say first you learn to read, then you read to learn. There's an order to that.
Definitely.
And getting the short vowel sounds down so you can understand them when you put them into that word. And also something I do that I teach kids to encode words. And in schools, they want them to decode words. It's very difficult to encode a word.
What does that mean? Encode?
To create a word.
Encode.
Encode a word.
E-N-C-O-D-E.
Yeah. So I've shown everybody, adults, have them go through a process of learning the short vowels and then attaching a consonant and be able to just rattle off ha, he, he, ha, ha, ba, 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 ma, 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 ma. Do you remember when you were in school doing that? Sure. And then you take to encode, you take the individual letters and then you tell them what they are and there'll be a hyphen. So they'll take a pause and they'll go and then the blend, le, be another hyphen and a T. Oh, I just spelled out let. And we go through that process. And they do it very quickly. I mean, they really do. Children adults will do it very quickly. I've had kids blurt out in a very positive way, and they'll say, "Oh, I've never done that before." I mean, they get it. Yeah.
Well, it's a tool.
Yeah.
It's a mental tool, or it gets incorporated into the brain. And I can't imagine not having grown up with that opportunity for learning in that manner. I remember sounding out words. I hope that folks, if any of you might be interested in talking with Mike, if you know someone, a child or an adult who could benefit from some assistance, I gave you the website before, backtobasicsreadingclinic.com.
Yeah, I asked that I be contacted by telephone. I rarely use the internet now because of all the problems in the internet. And so I would ask that they call me by phone.
Okay.
899-3235.
Okay, let me
Please.
write. 899-3235. 35. Okay.
Thanks.
Well, let's see. Okay, so you also teach math?
The old-fashioned way.
Like I did? I'm old-fashioned.
So the brain has to be exercised. And when you do everything, like if you give a 6-year-old or a 5-year-old a calculator, there's nothing, that's all concrete. That's not abstract. And so if you give them a calculator and they go through the functions, of course a 6-year-old is capable of using a calculator and adding, subtracting, multiplication, division. But that's not the same as using a paper and pencil.
And your brain.
And your brain. And doing it. And another question I've asked for over 20 years is, if you have a decimal point, the number to the left of it, what does that represent? And the number to the right of it, what's that represent? And I've yet to have a child or well, maybe an adult, probably a child.
So are you, I'm guessing here what you're leading up to with the decimal point. The larger number is to the left.
A whole number's to the left.
Okay, and then the partial.
The fractional numbers
yes.
to the right.
Yeah. Like 8.5 would be 8.5. Yeah.
And that would be another step that's a half. So we got to figure out what we're doing here. So numbers to the left, the whole numbers, the columns would be ones, ones, tens, hundreds, and so on, thousands. The ones to the right would not begin at 1, they'd begin at 10. So if you had 1.1, you got a whole of something for your 1, and the 0.1 will represent, it'll be a fractional number, 1/10.
One of the things regarding math is that when I've been in a few different stores and the clerk needs to figure out, something mathematically, I help them if they're young because they're struggling to get it right. So I say, here, this is what you do.
So I'm glad you mentioned that. I've also never had a student can make change.
Never had a student
that could make change.
Oh,
so
really?
I have a bowl of change there, and we go through a process where we pretend that we're a
vendor and a
yes,
customer.
Exactly. Now I go through the process, and I tell them, how to say the number and start counting up to 100. That's the change.
Yeah, good. It all ties in together, and it's all very basic. And it's using your brain, and then because you've been able to do something, you feel good about yourself, and you can accomplish more and build on that going forward. But if you don't ever capture in your mind the basics, the fundamentals, then how can you advance and build on that?
Well, my answer to that is you need to be taught problem solving logically, as opposed to what to think emotionally is far different than how to think logically. And I encountered that over the years so much. Oh my. Do you want me to give you an example?
Sure.
Okay. I see a lot of kids come in and they have anxiety about the climate and global warming and so on.
About global warming.
And a lot of kids, they'll express to me their anxiety about it, and they have fears about the North Pole ice cap melting, and then the cities along the seaboards flooding. And so the thing I go through with kids is I'll say, are you aware that most of the ice in the North Pole rests on water, not on land? And no, they didn't know that. And then I'll say, okay, if most of the ice is on water, that water has already been displaced by the volume of ice sitting on it, okay? And I said, let's take the mystery out of it. When you go home tonight, you take a glass, fill it right up with ice cubes. Not here, but right up with ice cubes. And then pour water in the glass exactly to the rim, the edge of the rim, and put it on your kitchen shelf. And of course, the anxiety goes other. They say, oh, my mother's not going to like that. It's going to go on the shelf. And I said, well, look, the ice in that glass has already displaced the water. And so when it melts, it's going to be right here at the edge of the glass. And a week later, they'll come back and they'll say, I can't believe that's what happened. And I'll say, yeah, If all the ice at the North Pole that's on water melted in a second or a millisecond, it wouldn't change the sea level.
Really? I'm learning.
Yeah, that's what they say, though.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of fear-mongering going on about global warming, or so-called, I put it in quotes, global warming. And there are ice caps growing in other parts of the world. They're not all melting. But to some folks, some who are actually wanting to aspire to be president, have said things like the world will be, we have so many, 12 years or whatever, I don't know.
Well,
that frightens the children.
Yeah. I think Al Gore said that, and he produced his movie 18 years ago, the same thing, and he built his big home right on the ocean side in California. So, can I address another thing?
Yes, please.
They'll talk about, I've had kids come in, they'll say, my teacher said the ice at the South Pole is melting, and there's a huge piece of ice that's as big as Rhode Island. It's about ready to drop into the sea. And I said, well, let's talk about this moment for a moment. Did you know that Antarctica is the 5th largest continent in the world? They'll say no. And I said, it's the highest continent because the elevation comes from all the ice on it. And I said, the average depth of ice in Antarctica is 2 miles. So if you put that in feet, 5,280 feet in a mile, and you double that, you're coming up to over 10,000, 12,000 feet of ice. And there is a part in central Antarctica where the ice is 3 miles thick.
Wow.
And I think that when people talk about a piece of ice getting ready to drop into the ocean as big as the state of Rhode Island, they're mistaking it for the pressure of the ice pushes down, and they have large ice shelves that push out over the water. There's a Ross ice shelf that's miles long, and I think the average depth of the shelf itself is like 100 feet. So there'll be pieces of ice that'll drop off, yes, that are a mile long, but they're flat and they're about 100 feet thick. And that's just a natural thing goes on periodically.
Well, my personal view is that, and it's just what I believe, is that Mother Nature does its thing. And I don't necessarily believe that mankind is making a huge, maybe a small impact, but I don't believe that we're making a huge impact on the natural environment in terms of hot and cold.
Well, there's geoclimatologists now stepping forward. I see it periodically in the paper. I heard one just very recently on the radio. I saw something in the newspaper, and there's a bunch of geoclimatologists that have signed a thing that we need to look at this scientifically and not emotionally.
Well,
the Earth's climate is governed by the irradiance of the sun. The sun governs our climate here. And that's been going on for a long, long time.
I know the United Nations had a big study, supposedly with a lot of scientists giving their views about all this global warming, man-made global warming, and then come to find out after the fact when people delved into what they had done, they changed their findings to agree with the message that they wanted to get out there. And anyway, Vermont is one of the least, if not the least, carbon emitter. We have all the forests that absorb, any gases, what have you, and why we're being controlled by those who want to change the way things occur, like what kind of appliances and light bulbs and vehicle and fuel for your house and all that. Leave me alone. Leave me alone.
So,
anyway, we've
So there are books out there written by scientists, different types, and I read 2 of them so far, and they talked about carbon. There's a perfect cycle. Tree, the leaves take in carbon, and their waste product is oxygen. And we breathe oxygen, and our waste product is the CO2.
Yes, CO2.
Yeah. So, and then you have greenhouses all over the country get maximum growth out of their green plants by pumping in carbon dioxide. A lot of people don't know that. They get vegetables to grow very large. And
Really?
Yeah. They pump in carbon dioxide. And they
Into the atmosphere in the greenhouse?
in the greenhouse, yeah.
Interesting.
Make the plants grow larger and faster, yes. And I was thinking of if you, both the Americans and Russians have done ice core samples in Antarctica, because that ice cap's been there a long time, and they can tell what the weather was like in the past. So if you go far enough past, you'll see there far, far more CO2 in the atmosphere than there is now. And you'd have to just think about it for a moment. In the dinosaurian period, we had dinosaurs that weighed 100 tons that were they were not meat eaters; they were vegetarians. So dinosaurs that large were eating, and the CO2 was much more dense in our atmosphere. They were probably eating leaves, single leaves the size of a house or something.
Wow. Yeah. Well, what I'm not a historian along those lines by any, although U.S. history was my favorite subject in school always. But we have a lot of things happening that are disruptive to the traditions, the normalcy. A lot of people are trying to make big changes, but we're primarily dealing here tonight with people who need help with the basics of life.
Absolutely, I agree with that. Absolutely. When you talked about history, my oldest kids, when they went through school, my daughter was in her last year of high school. It was December, and she came to me, and she was very discouraged. She wanted to drop out of school. Thank God, I said, no, you can't do that. She's a nurse practitioner today. Wow. It wasn't because she wasn't smart. She was frustrated. And I said, tell me what it is you need. I'm going to help you with that. And she said, well, number one, I know nothing at all about American history. I know nothing about the Constitution. I said, have you ever read the preamble of the United States Constitution? She said, what's that? I said, okay, wait a minute. And I got out a book on the Constitution. I read the preamble to the United States Constitution to her, and it was so remarkable, her response. She looked at me like it was this gift that had just been opened. And she said, oh, Dad,
it is.
Dad, read that to me again. Aww. She could hardly believe what she was hearing.
Really?
My next oldest son, when he was in 8th grade, and he's a history buff today, by the way.
Really?
Yeah. He came to me and he said, Dad, I don't know anything about our history. And I said, okay, then we will start, you and I will work in the evenings, and we'll start with our colonial history. We're going to go back to 1588 when the first English settlement was settlers were dropped off on Roanoke Island. And the ship that brought them said they'd be back. The journey was a long way to sail from England. And they said, so it would be minimally 6 weeks. And they said, we'll be back in 3 months with supplies. Well, they didn't come back for 3 years because England was at war with Spain.
Those people.
That was in 1588. The first permanent English settlement was in 1607 at the mouth of the James River, Jamestown Colony. And that colony struggled to stay alive until 1619. So these are things that he was so into that about our history, where we came from, so we get perspective.
Absolutely. I wish that you could do that for all of the young people, because when you don't, today the students are learning in our schools about all different cultures and countries, but until you have a grasp, a great understanding of the foundational principles of your own country and why you are a free individual and why you have individual rights and opportunities, you can't, until you can appreciate that, you can't compare another country's ways of doing things against what you have here. You have to understand what you have first. And then you can have an educated method of comparing that with what you have in other countries that you may or may not want. And our children are the future of our country. And if they don't have a solid grasp, it's a government of the people, by the people, for the people. The government's just the vehicle for us to be able to have, what I want to say, the opportunities that we have to create an environment, but not to control us.
So what's coming through clearly to me is this perspective that's lacking now. And if we don't have that perspective, then we don't understand the gift that we received from our forefathers. Amen. It was an amazing gift that, no other country was founded on a constitution like we have. And it was very, very serious business. From 1787 to 1791, that 4-year period. Remember, the French Revolution started in 1788. From 1787 to 1791, they worked on the Bill of Rights. And the reason for that was
that Madison who pushed for that? Madison and Jefferson. I think Madison wrote to Jefferson, who was an ambassador to France, and he said, we've created this constitution for the foundation of our nation, but I'm concerned because we don't have any rights for the individual. And that's how that came about. And the constitutional, the members of the Constitutional Convention, in 87, they voted for the Constitution. But it wasn't until 89 when the citizens, voted for it on top of that. And then in 91, we got the Bill of Rights.
And the other reason that precipitated that was the Western Territories refused to join with the 13 colonies because they said, look, we've got all the rights in the world. We can say what we want to say, we can do what we want to do, and we're not tied down. And so if we're going to join with you, we need a Bill of Rights. And so they said, okay, we need suggestions. Well, all these territories came up collectively with something like, I forget the number, let's say 178 suggestions. And they worked it down to 17 for a Bill of Rights. And then Congress said, let's work on it some more so we can get 10, a manageable number. Let's do that. And they finally did it to them. So it's a whole process. I mean, it's an amazing thing when you think about it.
And they were bright men, and they had their arguments, and but they finally came up with something that we can be proud of and be grateful for. And we have to make sure, whether the family does it or hopefully the schools do it, that make sure that our youth understand what this country was founded on. Now we're down to almost 3 minutes and 45 seconds.
That was fast.
That's what they all say. So I want to make sure, there are so many testimonials here from students of yours. Mike, we're so grateful that we found you. You and my child have worked very hard this past year, and it is paying off for all. We're looking forward to a successful year at Christ the King. If at any point we feel that, C could again utilize your services, we will call. Labeled ADHD, emotionally depressed and out of control in the classroom. My son spent more time out of the class than in it. Connecting with Mike changed my son's academic career. He's now has consistent A's and B's in class. His behavior has changed, and most importantly, he's happy. Thank you.
So do we have a couple of minutes?
Just about. Go ahead.
So I do a lot of exercises and get the children involved in these brain exercises. So I get them doing, say, 3 things all at the same time. And because I've been in the psychology business so many years, I realized that when people start to yawn profusely, it's because the brain is starving for energy, and the energy comes in the source of oxygen. So you get moving and breathing. I mean, that's why we yawn, right? So I do a lot of brain exercises, and get it up and running, right? Get that brain up and running. I have them do times tables, but systematically. It's not just, this number or that number. I do it so they can learn it in order, just like you and I did, and write everything they can possible, especially in math. I
can't imagine how wonderful a youth would feel once they feel that they're in accord with their classmates, and they feel like they have a foundation to build on, from that time forward. And you're still there for them if they should need you, but probably you'll have other new clients that need you.
So another thing I do is tell them stories, because the human brain is constructed for storytelling. And when children are in that developmental stage, they like to hear some things that are very unusual, like dinosaurs and so on, or something that's kind of bordering on disgusting. And once in a while, I'll tell kids about the corpse flower in Asia. Have you ever heard of it?
No.
It only blooms about every 10 years. And when it blooms, the temperature in the flower actually goes up to 98 degrees. And we talk about average body temperatures. And when it blooms, it looks like something out of a horror novel, and it stinks like rotting
something
flesh.
You don't forget.
You tell them a story like that, and they love it. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. I know we wandered a little bit, but that's what I do, I guess. And just thank you so much for what you do. I have to wind it up. Folks, thanks for tuning in. Appreciate it. And don't forget to get hold of Mike, 899-3235. Have a great week. I'll see you again soon. Good night.
Thanks for having me on your show.
You're welcome.
That was a fast hour. Did it seem fast to you?